Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. We're still getting warmed up. It's a few minutes early, and we'll wait for some others to join. We had about 20 registered attendees. David is on the line, set up and ready to go. This is a part 2 webinar. So we're going to be very brief on the introductions, but I will do some mainly to kill some time. This is completely interactive. David is a highly focused presenter, but he has asked us to interrupt anytime. So you can put your questions in chat. You can unmute yourself. We'd love to have your video cameras if you don't mind those. Just ask anytime, and if it's via chat, I will interrupt David when it seems convenient and get his attention. We're just kind of small talking right now, waiting for a few others to join. David, where are you at again?
I'm in the middle part of England, an area called the Cotswolds, very pretty rural area. And I live in a little village, a sort of typical picture postcard. This is where tourists come to visit us to see what England looks like, with houses that are maybe 400 or 500 years old in the village.
How close is that to Gatwick?
It's about 2.5 hours drive, so we're sort of in the middle of the country, near Oxford. There's probably, if anybody knows where Oxford is, middle part. And there's no customers here; they're all somewhere else, somewhere else in the world.
And we were just discussing that I'm on the west coast of Canada, and you are in the central part of England, and you and I are about 8 time zones apart. Is that correct?
Probably, yeah. And that's today. And then from what you were saying is you're going to be in Europe, and while you're in Europe, I'm going to be in other countries. So I've got projects in Australia, quite a few in the US at the moment, a couple in Europe, all kicking off in various stages, and some old customers that have been going on for many, many years in the Middle East as well. So I'm used to working across different time zones, just like yourself.
Yeah, people asking me to schedule appointments, like we have to use Calendly to do it because I cannot constantly translate these time zones correctly.
Yeah,
I always get the amount of hours correct. I don't always get the plus or the minus correct.
Yeah, well, that's why sending an invite to people, right. so it then translates it into their local time is very useful. But I look forward to trying to give people a little bit more awareness of some of the issues around Visio that can sort of reduce the load of time and everything. So yeah, should be a good session.
Sounds great. Well, we are recorded, and it is 2 minutes after, so I will go ahead and get started, which is welcome everybody to the IT Documentation Users Group. This is webinar, I'm calling it 2019.9A. Pretty self-evident what that means. The A just means this is kind of a special follow-up meeting, so I was hoping to have another .9 coming up for this month. But for today, we have Visio Automation Tips and Tricks Part 2, where we're going to focus a bit on network mapping. A little bit about our group. For those who may not be familiar, we were founded by Tracy Harden. She owns Next Century Technologies in Kentucky, been in MSP since 2001. She created this group back in May 2018 because she wanted some peer group help on how the heck to use IT Documentation Users Group. She recruited me back in 2018, August, to co-admin the group, and we opened it up to more than just IT Glue users because we felt that getting more people involved and interested would give us more brains to help answer our questions when we had them. And a little note, as of today, we have 1,000 members, which is super exciting. When I took this snapshot earlier this morning, it was 999, but I approved 1 more member after disapproving 2 members. So we are at 1,000 now, and that's super exciting. Again, more brains to help answer your questions. So please do encourage people to do it. You can actually use the @ITDUG at ITDUG in post, which will link to the group and automatically spell it out for you once it's linked IT Documentation Users Group. A little about me. I've been in IT since '94. I founded Eureka Process January 2017, and we do process consulting. And what I find is that almost all of the processes and tools you work with, the secret sauce has ended up in documenting what you decide. Without that, everything falls apart, which is why I was so keen to work with Tracy in the IT Documentations Users Group. I felt this is where we could give the most bang for the buck. We do have on the line with us David Cuthbertson from Square Mile, who's also founded Asset Gen. He has done hundreds of large-scale documentation projects using Visio, using automation Visio, and even writing some software to help populate that even faster for larger projects. And without further ado, since this is a part 2, I'm going to let David give his 30-second intro and just launch into the cool content. David, the show is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Alan. I'll just share my screen. Just check and see that all goes well. So let's hopefully share, and we should see a PowerPoint slide. Everybody, you see that? Good. It's great when the technology works.
It's the first time for everything.
Yeah, good. So let's get into this. I'll just adjust my screen a little bit. Come on. Good. So welcome, everybody. My name's Dave Cuthbertson. I'm not going to go through a full intro. We did a part 1 back in July, where I explained some basic things to do with Visio, things that would save you a lot of time. Some of that involves linking Visio shapes to spreadsheets so you don't have to type anything, and a couple others. So I'm not going to go and repeat all of that content, but I will use some of those tips and things which I showed, but I will gloss through them because there is a bit more time that you can look at previously. For those that are new, first of all, please go and look at part 1 because I'm not going to cover everything that's in there. But as a result of that, I was asked to focus on network diagramming, specifically by some of the people who attended the first session. And so that's what I'm going to focus on. My background is I actually have a communications and electronics degree. So I actually started off in the networking world back in 1979 when I got my degree. And I've subsequently worked and been a network troubleshooter. I've developed S&MP management tools and systems. I was installing Cisco's kit in England as the only installer at one stage on contract. And so there's a long history there. And I even ran a company doing outsourcing of people's networks. So I ran voice and data networks for people. My day job, what do I do today, is I develop technology. I've been doing this for about 14 years with our Asset Gen company, which is a software company. And our Square Mile company provides services around the software to help people with naming conventions. Did a lot of work in the ITIL community and ended up chairing the ITIL group in the British Computer Society. But a lot of our work with Visio, because we use Visio as a reporting tool effectively on how you understand an infrastructure. And if anybody wants to look a little bit further, there are free Visio utilities. I'll probably show some of them so that you can have for yourself, but they will save you time because I developed them because I have a lot more diagrams to do than most people. And so a lot of what we do is helping people gather information about their environment, typically on a medium to a large scale environment. So there could be 10, 50 racks, or there could be 10,000 racks. Doesn't really matter to us. With software, you can automate a lot, but you still have to have conventions and standards and data. So we try where possible to refer to existing frameworks like ITIL, TIA, COBIT, various other things to help understand. So what's the best way to do this? What is best practice in the management of change? And then the support of the systems around you, including the technical documentation of the infrastructure to underpin processes. You can see a load of logos there. Over the last 14 years, we've picked up quite a few customers. We're currently running probably 6 or 7 major projects in the US at the moment, some direct, some through partners, where they're going and reverse engineering infrastructures so they can then plan and transition them in a big way. But it can be quite diverse. Everybody uses roughly the same components in different ways. Sometimes it's just the physical environments, but also we do the logical side. And so a good starting point that I find for a lot of people is to say, everybody's used to using spreadsheets. Quite a few people use Visio. Nobody's ever had any training. But also you sometimes have to summarize things in a verbal format, Word, to then structure things. And of course, there comes a point where you then say, really, we should do this with a database. And so there are many different types of database-driven systems to give us the advantages of audit trails and various reporting mechanisms and workflow and process. When you take a step back and you look and say, I've got hundreds of spreadsheets, I've got thousands of them. Is there a better way? as you start trying to combine them all, it's always difficult doing a database because you then start realizing they're using different names. Yep. Hello. Sorry.
I think Dan was just getting it tested.
All right. Okay then. Yep. So when we actually start trying to combine information, what I found useful is to just break things down and say, well, before you start doing anything, and this is where diagramming starts coming in, realize that actually you're always going to need a different view of any component to support different information needs. There's a commercial view, there's a physical view, where are things? The commercial view could be ownership and warranty. There's a logical view, and obviously this is where networks come in. We want to do logical or physical network diagrams, but also we might want to have diagrams of how virtual systems are clustered together to deliver applications, and maybe even the business view. You know, this is how the electronic funds transfer system works. This is how baggage handling works. This is how our building management system works. And also we may want to separate for control purposes environments and say, this is the production view, this is the DR view, this is the dev view. But actually I need to understand which components are where. And the end result of all of this is you end up with a lot of documentation. And so there are good ways to do things. And the first one is to recognize, try and reduce the amount of data, but also use that data more effectively to underpin and support these views. And effectively what we do is what most people do, is you draw a diagram to explain something. But if I've got a lot of buildings, I've got a lot of diagrams. If I've got a lot of networks, I've got a lot of diagrams. So how do we join them together? And that's what we'll be covering in this section, focused around network mapping as part of this. We may, and at the bottom you see two different symbols for a server. We may want to have physical symbols where we're doing things like rack layouts, or we want to show particular ports, or we may not even care about that. We need a higher level view. We just want a logical schematic because I want to see what a firewall is or what a router is by the symbol itself, because I don't recognize the various models and types of various components. So when we start and we look and say, here's a nice starting point, let's draw a network diagram of this rack so that it's easier to understand than looking at the wires and thinking, I have no idea what that means. What is that? We start making some choices. And if you make the choices in the right way, in a particular method, it actually becomes quite easy. And the easy way is to break it down and say, first of all, I need to define what I mean by buildings and rooms and racks. And then the next stage is then to say, what about the equipments that are in the racks, so that I can give them identifiers and I can say this server is connected to that switch. But actually there's a patch panel or two in the middle. Which patch panel? Well, let's give it a name. And this is my day job, helping people get that naming convention right. Because once you've got that, it's relatively straightforward to deconstruct any environment into a few spreadsheets and load them into a database. So the scope could be, I want to do a logical diagram of those racks. So what level of detail do we need? Do we just need to do a logical view? So I don't care about all of the individual cables. All I care about is the important stuff. And it could be, I don't care about all the end devices. I may just want to do the back. And what I'm going to try and do is just make sure you're aware of things that will really help. Some may be basic issues, but maybe others as well. Okay, so the first things, organizing yourself. We may have different symbols. We may have properties under symbols. Typically, this is what we would gather from a spreadsheet. We may have different types of links, and we may organize things in terms of groupings. So we may do different diagrams for the data center or for the comms room, but what we're looking to see is we may group things together to make it easier to understand. So when we're covering our files, think about what you call things. And this is just configuration management practices. Give them names based around buildings, site codes, and purpose as well. So they all organize themselves. So don't call it network diagram of New York, call it New York network diagram, so we can see New York, Washington, and other states and things. So not all the simple stuff, but also about how we do versioning control. We break those rules with our automated systems because actually we don't call them version 1 and version 2. We use exactly the same name every time for the file, even when we update it. But we archive the original with a date and time. Because if you've opened up a diagram maybe 2 months ago and you want to look at a diagram, you want to open up the latest version of that, but you don't know what the latest version is. So we found from a more practical perspective, use the same name for the same file, but have an archiving system that then archives the old versions in case you want to reference them. But this comes down to organizing yourself, and this will apply to templates and stencils as well. Now, I'll start with templates and stencils, and the focus will be how do we organize ourselves so we're actually able to use Visio rather than having to sort of cope with what it gives us. So let's go straight into Visio. I'll just start it up. So here's a blank Visio diagram, and what most people will do is they will go File, New, and then they'll be presented with a series of options. And if I click the network option of categories, I'll be presented with a number of templates that we can see there, different stencils and all sorts of things. And what Visio has a standard, and if you have the Office 365, some of these things you may think, that looks new. And the reason is, if you have the Office 365 version, there is constant new stuff being added. The old stuff you can see there, and I'll just use what people may already be familiar with, which is the older versions. Let's go and click, and you'll get the option first of all to say we're going to be using metric or US units. As I'm based in Europe, I'll use metric, but obviously it doesn't make a difference. But it is important that actually you just use the same units all the time, so you don't end up with printing problems and also sizing issues as well. Now, normally when we come to create something, we'll have, in this case, I've opened up a Visio template, and the Visio template has opened up a page, in this case, landscape, and we would drag a shape off the stencil, and in this case, this is one that's a representative of a server, and we would typically type something, and I'll just call it test, and as you can see, this has been set up to actually put the text below the shape, but that's not always the case when we have components. As one of the things that Visio has is, with a lot of its pre-built stencils and shapes, if I do a right click on that symbol, there's embedded data in there, which we can see at the moment, which you could fill in to make it easier to record things. And this can be filled in from a spreadsheet. But this is a bit of a pain if you're actually going to go to link and use spreadsheets, because you'll start adding or ending up with conflicts. This is already a set here, but here, for instance, I've got the manufacturer, but your spreadsheet might have the make or the supplier. And you've got things here like rooms, but you might have office. You might have additional data like customer. So one of the first things is, if possible, is to remove anything that's unnecessary so that then you can use things. And you saw the shape data we had here. And there isn't any consistency in Visio symbols, because if I do a right click and I go data, and we look at the shape data for that symbol, you can see that we have a whole load of information. If I pick up something else, like say, what have we got here? A scanner, and I drag that across and drop that in, you can see the shape data for the scanner is completely different. So I'd have to modify and add that. And every time I choose something different, I'm going to have different sets of data. So a video camera doesn't have very much, and a router doesn't have the same as a server. So this isn't very good from a control perspective, which is why it's best that you don't rely on Visio's inbuilt data. You actually create your own symbols, and you either have nothing or just the data that you want to have, because otherwise it just gets cluttered and you miss the point of having all of this. If you choose manufacturer symbols, they will have, so if I open up a stencil from a manufacturer, and I'll just open up, say, a Cisco switch or something like that. So Cisco switches, and I drag across a Cisco switch. So there's a Cisco switch. You can see its data is completely different. It's very specific to Cisco. It's got its part number, and it's got the numbers of ports and various other things. But it's not really very useful. And whatever the symbols that you have, I drag something else on. That particular symbol there, a C3KXNM1G, it's a 4 gigabit Ethernet module. Look at all the data that you've got there. And this is all from, just one of the things that's in Cisco. So it's got a whole load of information in it, which is actually more about a little module than there is about something more important, which is a whole switch. So the first lesson here is don't rely on what other people have, create your own conventions and standards, and it makes it simple. Otherwise, you're coping with a lot of stuff, and I'll show you different ways to get around this. So I'm not sure if anybody's looked or tried using any of this data, but they'll often find that relying on actually give you a lot of work in its own right. It doesn't simplify, it just complicates things. Okay. The best thing, as I said, is to actually have nothing. And the reason for that is then we can link things to shape. So if, for instance, I wanted to link this server here and bring in information about its name, its IP address, and various other things, this is the way I would do it. And this is what I covered previously. I would go to the data option at the top. I would go to bring in a custom import, or you might have linked data to shapes in one of the older versions of Visio. Let's link to an Excel workbook. Do next. Let's select an Excel workbook. Here I have an inventory list. And I'll just step through the options to say which tab do I want to link to. And do I want to filter out any columns or rows? Give us an identifier like the name of something. And if I finish, it will expose all of that data in here. So if I want to draw a network diagram and I want to have some information like IP addresses and others, I don't have to type anything. All I have to do is just drag this by doing a left click and hold and drag and drop it onto that server. And if I now just close this down and do a right click on the server, you'll see that where it found a match, it's put in the data. So it's found that there was a match with manufacturer and IP address. And then where there wasn't a match, it's then created its own things at the bottom. So here we have model number, which is what was in our spreadsheet, but in their terms, that maybe that should have been product number or part number or product description. So really, it's best to get rid of all of that if you can. And so it will create things where needed, but what it does mean is good data is good diagrams. There's a whole load of stuff we don't necessarily need. So the first question is, how do we get rid of information to make it easier for our diagramming? And this is the technique. So I'll delete that server. I'll go back to the same server and drag this across. In the previous session, I showed how you could enable developer mode. And in developer mode, which is just a tick box in the advanced options, if we click on developer, you see these various options here to be able to look and see if there's any protection on a shape or any behavior. So for this shape here, if I click on protection, the aspect ratio is protected. So if I try making this wider, you see how the aspect ratio is there. If I go to developer mode, I can undo the aspect ratio, and then it means I can then make this thinner or thicker or size it whichever way I want. One of the other things when you go into developer mode is you also unlock the internal shape sheet within each shape, which actually describes this symbol and how it's made up. So if I do a right click on here, you'll see there's an option called Show Shape Sheet, which you only get if you've unlocked developer mode. And if I click on that, effectively what you see at the bottom here is a whole load of information which you can then start to say, oh, this defines what the width of the shape is. And there's some user-defined cells here, whatever they are. And there's shape data. In fact, that shape data, that looks like all of the different things that actually I was seeing when we did a right click in the data. The reason I'm showing you this, and just very simple, is if you go into this area and you do a right click, you can delete this whole section, close down the shape sheet window, and if I now do a right click on data, I have no data on there at all. So if I link to a spreadsheet, I only get the data which I'm used to using, which has come out of my monitoring system or my IT glue system or whatever they may have. So if I go back and I look at my sheet, so there's our sheet. If I drag and drop this in onto the server, that's the data I get. So this organizing yourself means don't rely necessarily on Visio's inbuilt systems or manufacturer shapes. Just make it simple for yourself with doing that. And you can use any visual image to create a shape. So even if you don't have a particular type of symbol or manufacturer or type of server or system that you want to use in your network diagrams, it's very easy to do it yourself. I'll just fire up Google, go to do a Google search for a Cisco Nexus 7000 as an example. So assuming I don't have any Visio shapes, I'll just go to images. So there's a whole load of images of switches and various other things. And if I want to use, say, this one here is my symbol to actually show diagrams, this big Cisco switch, then the easiest and simplest way is to just use the snipping tool, take a copy of that image, copy it, and then go into Visio and paste it. So there's our image. The one final thing to finish with is to then just group it so that Visio knows it's one single group. And now I can take this and drag this on top there. And now I have all the data in that symbol. So actually be able to then say, I can now use real life images or photographs or anything. So you can use Visio for more than network diagrams, but it's worthwhile organizing yourself before you start because it makes it simpler and it makes it easier to fill in the right sorts of data without any mistakes. Okay, so Visio is a very flexible tool to be able to do this. The next thing, of course, is how do we do a diagram easily and quickly? Well, the best thing is to take anything that you've stored and you've spent the bit of time preparing yourself and just save it in your own stencil. And it's very simple to do. Most people get a bit afraid of it because they don't understand, but all you have to do is go to more shapes. Yeah. And you'll say, let's create a new stencil. In this case, I'll keep the same units metric. And all we then do is we just drag these across. So we'll just drag that in and drop that. It's called master 2. And I'll just rename that and call that server. I'll take this one here. In fact, I'll just get rid of this thing called a data graphic. We'll cover that later on. Let's just clear that. Just drag it in there. And I'll call that Nexus 7000. Okay. And so now I can have things based around what customers have or what we're actually using for a design. Okay. Very simple to do.
And David,
and then, yep.
One tangent question.
Yep.
As compared to Visio has all this power, have you tried any other diagramming software such as Lucidchart or SmartDraw?
Not really. Originally, this all came when I was using a package which is no longer available called NetVis, which came from a US company years ago. And the reason why we use Visio is because we can actually automate the update of those shape sheets, and we can draw diagrams and position everything automatically. And the vast majority of IT people use Visio in the corporate world, which is really our sort of target marketplace. I hate to say I've come across other packages and there's web-based versions and various other things, but often the level of detail we're dealing with is one where we need to produce large amounts of diagrams with tools that people already use. And unfortunately, there isn't the adoption outside, you could say, of the Microsoft environments. I think I really should explore a little bit more because the world has changed since I've been doing things. But one thing we have is a lot of people said, could you link this in with AutoCAD and produce diagrams in a similar way? And the answer is, it's too complex. It's too difficult, and actually the file sizes get too big. So actually there is an element of choice here. It's nice having symbols that look like devices, but there is the problems there. And it's the same, I think, probably also with other tool sets as well. They have their own flavors. What we're doing here is we're making Visio do thousands of diagrams automatically. I'm showing you how we do one, but really what I want to be able to do is to have lots of people do all the same things. What about yourself, Alan? Do others have more experience of using those other tool sets?
As I mentioned in the chat to everyone, I've used the two that were mentioned, Lucidchart and SmartDraw, but
Yep.
I've never really looked at the data-driven side.
Yep.
I did a spreadsheet once in Visio to import data, but what you're showing here, I don't even know if those tools exist in other ones.
The thing is, Visio is a very mature product, it's just people don't understand it. And all the things I'm showing you is not new. There's functionality since Visio 2007. I make a living out of teaching people how to use a tool. In fact, Microsoft is even a customer of mine. I've been teaching their data center people how to do their data center floor plans and layouts for the Azure rollouts, because it's one thing to have the tool, but to understand how to use it well. And it's just focus, really. But you can see what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to actually be in control so that then I can have a standard which any of my team can use. And if I'm going to produce 1,000 diagrams, I really want to have a standard template that's already set up with these symbols, which is exactly what I need. So I get 1,000 copies of exactly the same thing. Because the best thing is don't use different symbols. Try and just use the same things, and you don't need legends on diagrams because everybody knows what that is, because that's the only way you represent a server or a switch. So a lot of this is about just simplicity, really, standardization. So before I go on, any questions for anybody? So feed them through Alan. I'm not sure if anything's come up, Alan.
In chat right now.
Okay. So I'm creating a stencil here. Now the next thing is, as part of my stencil I'm doing, will be good. I'll save it as I'm going along, and I'll add things to this. So let's just save this here, and I'll just call it ITDUG1. And then this means I can reuse it, but also I can send it to other people as well. And what I'll now do is I'll create some links. I want to link a few things together. And so one of the great features of Visio is its connector option. And I'll explain a little bit more about the connector. But say, for instance, I've got this connector here, and I want to use this to represent, say, copper networks. What I might do is, I'll just pin this there, is I'll make the line a little bit thicker, like that. And that would be a copper link, for instance. And if I just take a copy of this by doing Control-C and Control-V, I'm going to make this one red and say this would be a fiber link, so that I've got a color coding for different things. I might have different color codes for others. I might have squiggly lines or something like that for wide area links, but just something that shows a difference. And I will now drag this link back in here, and I'm going to have everything I need. I'll just call it copper. We could call it data. It could be voice. It could be anything we like. And here we have fiber. And I'll spell it the American way, so that I don't get told off by the audience.
What is the non-American way?
Well, the proper way, which if I drag that on there, I would call it fiber, like that. We could have a long conversation about how people in America have been trained to spell badly, and they get tested to make sure they spell badly. So we don't have very much, but we still have some control over our own language here. But if you look at a lot of our literature, we use Americanisms because it just makes it easier. But this is important to actually make sure that you can integrate data, that you use common terms. But you can see, and I can bring up any other symbols. I can use things that exist already. So I could take, yet again, something else. So I might want to use this firewall symbol to produce firewalls and things. If I look at this, there's probably data in this already, which is different to the server. You think, I wish it was all this the same, it'd be nice. So the best thing is to get rid of it all. And if you remember from before, the technique is do a right click, go to the shape sheet, and then find out where there is shape data. And just do a right click in there and delete the whole section. And that deletes all the data in one go. And now I can then take this and drag this onto my diagram, and I'm going to call this a firewall. You can also, of course, put in things like you might want to change the size, you may want to change the default fonts. And in my case, I like to just try and make sure I spell it correct.
So you are building a template here. What would you call this section?
I'm building a stencil. Okay. So what I'm building here is a collection of shapes, which will help me do diagramming, which are consistent. Now, if I save this, okay, so I've now saved that. And if I close it, so let's stop editing this. Do you want to save it? Yes. And I just start again. So let's just do a new diagram, but I'm going to do a new blank drawing. Okay, so I've got no clutter. You'll notice how we've got a portrait page, because when we open up something new, it's got to have a page size. So if I was doing floor plans, I would set scaling. But if I now want to start doing any diagramming, I can open up that stencil that we were talking about. So let's just look at where did I put it? Where did I put it? My shapes.
$1 questions.
Yeah, too many different things. My shapes. The ITDUG. And so I don't have any clutter. I can now go and start putting things on a page and drawing them and then linking them together.
So as we develop our own processes internally, we can build our own stencils so that any technician is always using the same shapes of the same data fields and colors and such.
That's right. And that means it's simpler for them if you ask them to go and document a new customer site, or you're planning a change to a customer site and you have to create some document of what the network is going to look like. Just use the same things. But and this is where we start getting this issue between the handover between project and operations teams. Just keep everything simple. Sounds so obvious, but what it means is you need somebody who understands a bit about Visio, typically, to be a subject matter expert, and to then say, this is a good way of doing this. This is a good standard, a good convention.
And we have about 10 minutes of content time left.
Yeah.
So if anybody has questions, please get them out there as David proceeds here.
Yeah. So the next thing we're going to have is, how do we link things together? So what we have with this is, I've organized the shapes and the symbols. I can bring in data from different places. So I'm now going to bring in the original spreadsheet that we had before. So let's bring in that spreadsheet, which was the inventory. I'll just do next, and finish. And so this is where I can now link and put these in here. Although it says it's a firewall, I'll just put that as a router. But we can also bring in spreadsheets of connections as well. So this then makes it a lot easier when we're doing diagrams to then say that connection between these, let's just drag and drop this on that link. And if I close this down now and we have a look, it now means, but looking at the data, the link has the data of the ports, the cable IDs, the VLANs, and likewise the devices have that. And what we showed previously was how you can then create a data graphic that would then show all of that information and how everything all comes together. Just connect that together there. So there's a lot of different ways we can do this. I'll just finish off by just putting in a data graphic. So for those that haven't seen that before, what we do is we define a way of bringing out the data so that then we don't have to type anything. So we're going to take the equipment name. Let's just take this more fields. Let's take the name of the equipment. And let's put this as text. And there's various types of text and things. So the previous one we'll cover a little bit more. I'm going to use one here called heading 3, which is centered text. And I'm going to put the name of the device above the shapes so that all the devices will have their names above them. And I'm going to add a second item, which is IP addresses of the devices. And you can see any of the data that you see there can be displayed as part of this. I'm just going to use the same thing again. Filled. Let's put this in the center and below the shape. And you think, why is he doing all of this? Because what it does is it then means that I now have the firewall with the IP addresses and the switch with its IP addresses and other things all there as part of this. So we can very quickly start doing diagrams. And then when we start using these techniques, what we end up getting towards is this sort of thing, where we go to line diagram, where what I now have is I now have a lot of links joining things together, but I can click on any link and I have information in there on the ports, the cards, and various other things, because I can get that all from monitoring systems and tools. What the connections, you might have cable IDs, and on the actual devices themselves, I might have information, but this is the sort of things you can pull in. So if you organize yourself well, it makes it very easy. But the best thing is to use your own symbols. And you can see on this diagram, I have a symbol set here. This stencil is called network topology ports. So I have special connectors I can drag across that are already set with port names and other things. This particular one here is the one that we give away free. So you're welcome to this if anybody wants it, where you can turn the ports on and off just to make it a little bit easier to hide things. Let's hide all the ports, or let's hide those ones particularly, or let's hide all ports. So different ways to show data. So as we're doing our diagrams, really just look to see where do I have information so I don't have to type anything. If I go back to the PowerPoint, what we've been covering now is how we would create a stencil and then the shape. And the shape properties, you can see we can get from a spreadsheet. We'll just go down to the next slide. Sorry. Next slide, yeah. So should you use the Visio's own built symbols, manufacturers your own? The answer is, in the long term, whatever's the best and the quickest, but in the long term, you'll find using your own is always the best because you get so much clutter and you can optimize things, reduce the file sizes, but also reduce the options that people have. But you will want to do physical and logical diagrams, so having a spreadsheet or an inventory is a very useful thing to be able to do. The next thing I'll do is I'll talk about how we connect shapes together. And because this is a bit that a lot of people misunderstand as to why does Visio do things when we connect them together? Because we're always going to connect things together with network diagrams. And the terms we're going to cover is dynamic and static glue. Does anybody currently on the link ever heard of that? You've just come off mute. Has anybody heard of dynamic and static glue?
I've heard of the words dynamic and static. What was the last word?
Glue.
Yes, I have. Is dynamic where you drop the endpoint in the shape versus on a point on the shape?
Sort of. So what I'll do is
I tried.
I'll just go. You tried, but the thing is, if you understand, then you'll understand how to drive it. So I'll start with the basics. So we'll drag across a pentagon, and we'll have a 5-pointed star as an option, just to explain when you're connecting things together, because this is important when you're doing diagrams. You want to show individual ports that connect to maybe an ISDN circuit or maybe a broadband circuit or something.
ISDN, huh?
Yeah, they still have it. And it's often used for out-of-band management into boxes because it's better than modems, but people still use modems. So the first thing is, here's a connector. And if I just come to the pointer tool, if I move my connector towards the shape, watch what happens. See how the whole shape goes green? Okay.
Dynamic.
And if I let go, that will connect the shape with what's called dynamic glue. So you're connecting shapes together. And if I take the other side and I move towards the pentagon, and you see how that's gone green? And if I let go, so that is dynamic glue. And what that means is whenever I move shapes around, they will try and connect together at the nearest point between the shapes. So Visio will make a routing decision for you. So that's really useful for doing logical diagrams. And so when you're doing things, it means you don't need to sort of worry about any particular points. But it's not very good if we're doing specific ports. So what we have is the ability to do a thing called static glue. So that if I drag this off, and as I drag towards the shape, you'll see how we have it green. But if I get closer to any of those little black dots or those connection points, which you can define yourself, it will be static to that point, and Visio will not try and make a choice. So if I move the pentagon around now, you'll see how it's always the bottom left leg of the star that's always connected. And this way I can then connect to a particular port on a switch or the power plug or something if I want to show exactly which port on a physical device. And likewise at the other end, I have the choice of dynamic or static glue. So if I go static here, these are now connected in the same places. So to show this in practice, let's just bring in that Cisco stencil that we used previously. So
and we have
this catalyst switch.
3 minutes of content time before our wrap-up section.
Yep.
He has a question to throw in.
Yeah. Okay. So I just clicked on the wrong one. Open.
Didn't mean to rush you. Now you're making mistakes.
Yeah. Sorry. So here I have my Cisco switch, If I bring in one of those connectors now, move it up here, and I zoom in, watch what happens as I get closer to this. You see how this shape that Cisco provided already has a connection point in there, so you connect to specific ports and it will snap to that. Or if I go to the uplink ports, it will snap to that as well. So if I move this around, it will stay always connected to that particular port, however I route it. So if you understand that, it then means you can then understand the difference between static and dynamic glue and how you end up with problems and when you're laying out diagrams. To show that in practice, if I go back to this LAN diagram here, if I click on this link, you'll see how it's connected to the edge of the shape. And as I get closer, you'll see that I've got these connection points on there, but I could also connect to the whole shape as well. Now, if I connect to the shape, it would go to the center, but we want parallel links. For showing this, if I just move these around, because of the static glue, it doesn't look very good now, does it? So anybody who's doing network diagrams, I recommend that use our utilities, because we created a utility here called Layout Connections that will look and create a little routine that will actually delete and move the connection points for you to then relay things out. So particularly where we have routing paths and various other things. So from a layout perspective, it saves a lot of time. And when you get into bigger diagrams and you want to have lots of these links going between places, the layout takes a lot of time. So this is just a little bit, just to give you an idea of connections and stencils and how you can do them. And this data connector that you saw there, so that we give that away. We normally just populate these for free when we're actually creating diagrams. But what you have to do is you have to filter out the information from your inventory lists and transfer it to the diagram. So it saves time and can be very quick if you've already got the data. You can also export the information on the diagram out into a spreadsheet if you do high-level designs and you then want an inventory list and a configuration by just typing things into data as part of that. So have any questions come up?
I do not see any.
Yeah.
I have a question that is a segue toward our wrap-up.
Yep.
You keep mentioning things that you give away or that are free.
Yep.
Could you make sure to email those to me? And I sent you an email already asking, so I can include them in the follow-up email as well, so they know how to get a hold of you or these tools.
Just to show you where you can get them, there's different places. This is our website. And under here, you'll see a thing called AssetGen Visio Utilities. You see those?
Mm-hmm.
And what we have there is the various utilities for doing data center floor plans, layouts, and others. The one I've been showing you, for instance, say the network connector. If I click on this, you'll see there'll be a little description of what it is. There's a video that shows you how it works. And all you do is you just send an email to us on our contact page. But you go to this website, Square Mile Systems, or the AssetGen site. And we give them away free because we develop these for our own use as part of the projects that we give to customers. And we keep adding new ones all the time. Basically, when I'm got fed up of laying things out or doing something that's repetitive, I talk to my developers and say, is there a better way of doing this? So these have all evolved for various reasons.
Right.
So that's where you can find things. Sort of as part of sort of the wrap-up, as we're just getting towards the end there, I wanted to cover that static and dynamic glue so that you understand that you can make things work your way, but of course you need to remember where you put those shapes and those connectors. But there is a limit to this issue of linking to spreadsheets, which is that basically the transfer and refresh is automated. You can refresh from a spreadsheet with changes in IP addresses, but unfortunately you can't connect things together. So go and have a look and see what productivity features and things are there. But what I'll do is I'll just finish off and show you what you would have to do, because you can create your own applications to do effectively what our software does, because there is a toolkit that comes with Visio if you're a programmer. But this is actually what you have to do to be able to do network diagrams in an automated way. The first thing you have to do is, and this is our commercial software, is you have to say, how big a diagram do you want? So you choose a scope. It could be an individual device, it could be a room, it could be a building, it could be a cabinet. So we're going to start in this computer room and finish in this computer room. So this is what you would do manually from an inventory list, but you're just using a database to filter it for you. On the right-hand side, what do you want on the diagram? Do you want the servers? Do you want the switches? Do you want core switches, edge switches, and maybe routers here? And then we're doing, at the bottom left here, we're doing a new diagram. We're updating the existing one. I'll call this LAN. And then what Visio stencil do you want to use so that then you're using the symbols which are important to you? Because you may have different symbols for doing fiber networks or for doing mobile phone networks or offices. And then essentially you then say, that's the filtering. Now can you not just create an inventory of everything that's a core switch or edge switch or router? Can you work out the connectivity through all of the cabling infrastructure and then draw the diagram for me? You notice I didn't click patch panels because I might have wanted to have all the patch panels to show the physical connectivity. But essentially what this application is doing is really doing what we would do manually. We would decide on a scope, we decide on a symbol set, and we then transfer the data to the diagram as we're laying it out. We still need to lay it out to make it more understandable. But what I'm doing here is, there's a fair number of devices, and you'll see it's going to end up like that raw diagram that we actually started with.
And while it's publishing, we do have one question you can address now or later.
Yep.
Dan was just on the AssetGen website, and there were 3 different products: Connect, SysMap, and Visio utilities. Can you give us super high level of the differences?
Yeah. This one I'm just using at the moment is called Connect. It's for doing physical infrastructure. So this is for doing data centers, networks, cabling, anything that you can touch that's hardware related. So it does floor plans, networks, and other things. The SysMap is for doing application and service maps, where we're trying to understand dependencies of maybe thousands of components. And so what's the business impact of this service? So they have different front ends because they both generate Visio diagrams, but it's different types of data. One's a physical side. And so like I mentioned last time, we're midway through a project with New York City to do 2,000 campus locations, which is all their schools. So we've got to do 2,000 network diagrams. But we've also got to do 2,000 security diagrams, 2,000 wireless access network diagrams. So that's 6,000 diagrams to do every week and refresh. So this is how you do it. You choose a scope based on a school, but you need to have a stencil to start with. So if I take all of this, you can see why we developed this utility here to lay out the connections, because when you do the automated things, Visio will lay them out on top of each other using dynamic glue. And then we've now created static glue to actually create the connection points, and it just calculates how many connection points you need as part of all of this. So having done a diagram like that, all you do is you save that filter in a filter template and you run it again. And so you may give it a useful name like this particular building, this particular site, this is the storage network, whatever. And you may have hundreds of these, so that then you can run a batch process every night and say, anything that goes on or in that building that's one of these, add it to the diagram or take it off. And we do the same approach for data centers and things.
Okay.
For you to try and do this yourself will be, Visio can do this, and this is why we use Visio, because it's relatively straightforward, but you do need to have some Visio skills. But at least you're aware of what Visio can do with spreadsheets as well.
All right, so I do have to wrap this up. You're running a bit late at one after.
Good. Yeah, but please look at Microsoft, and obviously if there's any other things, just as we've done with this, go back to Alan and say, if you found this useful and you'd like to know more, I've gone to a level of detail I didn't go to last time, just focus on networks, but there are other types of diagrams as well.
Excellent. And I have an email off to you, David, to send me whatever links. I will include them in the follow-up email as well to all registered attendees, whether they made it or not today.
And the thing is, just buy a book, go and have a look and see what it can do. And it was, because to be honest, some stuff is just basic things, anything that saves you time, because time is money. But the issue here is, how do we do it effectively? Yeah. So thanks, Alan. Thanks for the opportunity.
My pleasure. And David is also occasionally on Facebook in the ITDUG forums. Our next webinar, which I hope to be ITDUG 2019.9, is not quite decided yet. It will probably be the last Wednesday of this month, and we're looking at IT glue automation, sticking with the theme of automation. And perhaps that'll be a panel discussion. So stay tuned for that as Tracy and I get that documented. For those of you who may have gotten here through links besides ITDUG, you can look us up just by typing ITDUG in the Facebook search, or fb.com/group/ITDUG. This, again, we're emailing out the video link, but I will also always post these for free and publicly at eurekaprocess.com. You can contact me directly, and I'm going to send you all of David's information that he wants me to include in this follow-up email. Thank you all so much for attending. We'll see you at the next one or online. Have a great one.
Yeah.